Would you believe it if I told you that a single act of kindness, seemingly small yet profoundly genuine, could ripple outward and transform not just one life, but inspire thousands? This is the story of Elon Musk, not as the billionaire visionary, behind rockets and electric cars, but as a man who, for a brief moment, saw beyond the chaos of his world to lend a helping hand to someone society had long forgotten. The story begins on one of the coldest winter afternoons New York City had. Seen in decades, the kind of day where even the warmest coats felt inadequate and the biting wind seemed determined to cut through every layer. Manhattan's streets buzzed as usual, filled with hurried footsteps, the honking of impatient drivers, and the occasional street performer trying to make a buck despite the frigid air. But amidst this chaos was a man who barely noticed the world around him anymore. James sat hunched over on the icy pavement, his back pressed against the cold brick wall of a towering building. His worn cardboard sign, stained from countless days of use, read, "A little kindness can change a life. God bless." His hands, trembling from the cold, clutched the sign as if it were the only thing tethering him to humanity. James's story wasn't always one of despair. There was a time when he was just like any other New Yorker. He lived in a small, modest home in Queens, with his wife Laura and their 2 children, Emma and Ryan. His days were spent working as a mechanic, his hands perpetually coated in grease and grime, but his heart full of pride. Fixing cars wasn't just a job to James, it was a way of life. He loved the challenge of making something broken work again, the satisfaction of hearing an engine purr to life. But life has a cruel way of derailing even the best-laid plans. The 2008 financial crisis hit James's garage hard. Customers stopped coming in, and before long the shop was forced to close its doors. James searched tirelessly for another job, but the recession had left the city dry. And as if losing his livelihood wasn't enough, Laura fell ill, a rare and aggressive form of cancer. Medical bills piled up faster than James could pay them. Their savings evaporated, and soon the family home was sold to cover debts. Laura passed away within a year, leaving James devastated and broken. His children, unable to cope with the weight of their father's grief, drifted away to build lives of their own. And James? He found himself slipping further and further into despair, until one day he realised he had nothing left but the clothes on his back and the memories of a life that now felt like a distant dream. For years, James wandered the streets of Manhattan, each day blending into the next in an endless grey haze. Every morning he would find a new corner to sit on, holding his sign and hoping, praying that someone, anyone, would see him. Most people didn't. They rushed past, their eyes glued to their phones or fixed straight ahead, unwilling to acknowledge his presence. But this day was different. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. James shivered, pulling his thin jacket tighter around his frail frame. His breath formed small clouds as he exhaled, each one dissipating almost as quickly as it appeared. He hadn't eaten since the previous day, and the gnawing hunger in his stomach was almost as unbearable as the cold. Suddenly, the sound of a low, rumbling engine broke through the usual symphony of city life. James looked up to see a sleek black SUV pulling up to the curb. The car was immaculate, its windows tinted so dark they mirrored the surrounding skyscrapers. At first, James thought nothing of it. Fancy cars were a dime a dozen in this part of town. But then the door opened. A man stepped out, and immediately the air seemed to shift. The buzz of the street dimmed as heads turned, murmurs spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that Elon Musk?" someone whispered. James squinted against the sunlight, his heart skipping a beat as recognition set in. It was him. The Elon Musk. The man whose name was synonymous with innovation, ambition, and relentless determination. He had seen Elon's face countless times in newspapers and on TV, but to see him here, in the flesh, was surreal. Without thinking, James called out, his voice trembling, "Sir, do you have $1 to spare?" Elon stopped mid-step. He turned, his sharp, piercing gaze locking onto James. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The crowd, now gathering in, curious clusters, fell silent, their attention laser-focused on the unfolding scene. $1, Elon repeated, his tone even, yet carrying an undercurrent of intrigue. James nodded, his throat dry. Yes, sir. Just enough for something warm. To drink. Elon studied James for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. The crowd gasped audibly, the sound rippling through the gathered onlookers like a wave. Elon held the bill out to James, a faint smirk playing on his lips. I don't carry singles, he said. James's hands shook as he accepted the money, his voice cracking as he whispered, Thank you. Thank you so much. But Elon wasn't done. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself to James's level. This isn't just for a coffee, he said, his tone firm but kind. I want you to use this to start turning things around. Can... You promised me that? Tears streamed down James's face as he nodded fervently. I promise, sir. I swear. Elon reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a business card. Take this, he said, handing it to James. The card bore the name of a foundation dedicated to helping people like him, offering housing, job training, and emotional support. Be there tomorrow. Tell them I sent you. The crowd erupted into applause. Phones emerged from pockets, capturing the moment as it unfolded. Elon stood, gave James a small nod, and then returned to his car. As the SUV disappeared into the traffic, James sat there clutching the $100 bill and the card, feeling a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. As the black SUV disappeared into the sea of honking cars and bustling pedestrians, James sat frozen in place, his hands clutching the crisp $100 bill and the business card like lifelines. The cold wind bit at his cheeks, but for the first time in years he barely noticed it. His mind was spinning, his heart pounding as if it were trying to outpace his racing thoughts. Could this really be happening? For years, James had lived on the edges of society, invisible to the world around him. To have someone, let alone a man like Elon Musk, stop, speak to him, and offer genuine help felt like stepping into a dream he was afraid to wake from. The murmurs of the gathered crowd finally pulled him out of his daze. People were pointing, whispering, and a few even approached him. Did he really give you that? A woman asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and awe. James nodded, still too overwhelmed to find the words. He showed her the bill and the card, and her eyes widened. You're lucky, she said softly. Make the most of it. As the crowd began to disperse, James stood, his legs shaky beneath him. The business card in his hand bore the name The Phoenix Foundation and an address on the Upper East Side. He traced the embossed letters with his finger, the name feeling almost poetic. A phoenix, rising from the ashes. That night, James found himself lying awake in the corner of the shelter where he had managed to secure a spot. His usual thoughts of despair and loneliness were replaced by cautious optimism. The $100 bill was tucked safely inside his jacket, and the card rested under, his head like a talisman. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream, not of the past, but of what the future might hold. The next morning, James arrived at the Phoenix Foundation, the early sunlight casting long shadows on the pavement. The building was modern and sleek, its glass facade gleaming in the light. As he pushed open the heavy doors, he was greeted by warmth, not just the physical warmth of the lobby, but the warmth of smiling faces. A receptionist with kind eyes looked up as he approached. "Good morning," she said, her tone genuinely welcoming. "How can I help you?" James hesitated, suddenly feeling self-conscious about his worn clothes and unshaven face. He held up the card, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elon Musk told me to come here." Her eyes widened slightly, and her smile grew even warmer. "Of course," she said, standing and gesturing for him to follow her. Right this way. Over the next few hours, James met with a team of counsellors, social workers, and career advisors. They listened to his story without judgment, offering him hot coffee, a warm meal, and a clean set of clothes. They explained the services they could provide: temporary housing, job training programs, and access to therapy to help him process the years of trauma he had endured. For James, it was overwhelming. The idea that people cared, that they wanted to help, was almost too much to comprehend. "You don't have to do this alone," one of the counsellors said, her voice gentle but firm. "We're here to help you rebuild step by step." And rebuild he did. In the weeks that followed, James threw himself into the programs offered by the foundation. He attended workshops on resume building and interview skills, participated in group therapy sessions, and even took a few beginner courses on computer literacy. One day, during a career fair hosted by the foundation, James met a man named Tom, who owned a small but busy auto repair shop in Brooklyn. Tom was impressed by James's knowledge of cars and offered him a trial position. It wasn't long before James became a full-time employee, his hands once again covered in grease, a feeling he had missed more than he realised. The transformation wasn't just external. James found himself smiling more, standing a little taller, and reconnecting with the parts of himself he thought he had lost forever. Meanwhile, the story of Elon Musk's encounter with James had gone viral. The video, captured by multiple onlookers, was shared millions of times across social media. Headlines like "Elon Musk's $100 gift sparks a life-changing journey," and "How one act of kindness inspired a movement," dominated the news cycle for weeks. Donations poured into the Phoenix Foundation, allowing them to expand their programs and help even more people like James. Inspired by the story, individuals and companies across the country began launching their own initiatives to combat homelessness. As for Elon Musk, he was characteristically modest when asked about the incident in interviews. "I just saw someone who needed a little help," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life." But for James, Elon's gesture was more than just a little help. It was a lifeline. A year later, James stood outside his own apartment, a small, cosy one-bedroom in Queens. It wasn't much, but to him it was everything. He had saved up enough from his job at Tom's garage to afford the rent, and the walls were decorated with photos of his children and a few drawings sent by his granddaughter. One evening, as he sat on his second-hand couch, he turned on the TV and saw a news segment about Elon Musk. The anchor was discussing his latest innovation, but James barely heard the words. Instead, he thought about that cold winter day, the day his life changed forever. He pulled out the business card, now worn and faded, and smiled. If this story moved you, don't just let it end here. Take a moment to think about how you can make a difference in someone else's life. A single act of kindness, no matter how small, can create ripples that stretch far beyond what you can imagine. Like, share, and comment to help spread this message. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of compassion. Together, we can make the world a brighter place, one small gesture at a time.